and here a bingo was named.
And you weigh the right things on the right side and the wrong things on the wrong side.
Cosine equals 87 divided by 105, the square root of 105.
I mean, I can't always be their little girl.
Within the first year of life, our individual personality begins to emerge. We are adventuresome or shy, cheerful or melancholy, even-tempered or colicky. Some believe that it is our inborn temperament that defines these differences. Others say that it is our first relationships that have the larger role to play.
Good sleep. Did you have sweet dreams, huh?
What is the nature of these early forces that shape who we are and how we approach the world? And how do they impact our development?
I really didn't expect this kind of relationship, kind of bonding between me and my child, because my husband and I, we had been really close before we had the baby. But since the moment that Pierre was born, I thought I couldn't believe that inside of me, it's just, I was so attached to this little baby.
I think the biggest challenge of being a dad right now is sort of sharing the mom and changing over from a partner to somebody who is like the mother or the primary caretaker, and I feel like I'm sort of sometimes outside of that little circle.
There have been a number of theories about why infants become attached to their caregivers. According to both psychoanalytic theory and early behaviorist theory, an infant becomes attached to its mother or other caregiver because they are associated with food. Since the mother feeds me, she acquires value, and I become attached to her.
In a classic study, Dr. Harry Harlow made observations that called this premise into question. Harlow raised baby monkeys with surrogate mothers, one made of stiff, bare wire, the other of soft terry cloth. Only the wire mother was equipped with a bottle for feeding. When frightened, however, the babies sought security from the cloth surrogate and became attached to it.
The current explanation for why babies become attached to their caregivers is John Bowlby's evolutionary-based theory. According to Bowlby, you don't become attached to your mother or other caregiver because you were fed by them. Rather, attachment is a system built into the human infant through evolution. It's nature's designed way of keeping an infant close to a protective adult so that the infant will survive to live to maturity. Bowlby would have us imagine the human infant thousands of years ago living in a group setting, virtually unprotected from animals and other hazards in the environment. The very helpless, dependent infant cannot survive on its own. It must be protected by a more competent adult. Attachment is the system designed to provide that protection. And there are two parts of it. On the one hand, the human infant has certain tendencies, such as staying near a specific person, going to them in situations of threat, calling out for them if they're not accessible, never letting them get too far away. The adult has the complement of these characteristics, feeling protective towards infants, especially being attracted to an infant's cry and wanting to comfort an infant, staying near and coming quickly when the infant signals distress.
Hey, it's okay, sweetie. It's okay.
In the course of development, the attachment system changes. At first, the infant has very little in the way of capacities for staying near, following, calling to the caregiver. All it can do is cry when it's distressed, look at the caregiver if the caregiver's nearby, and be attractive to adults. In time, the infant takes on an increasing role. In time, the infant can deliberately signal, call for you in particular, follow you around, stay near you. A human infant is so strongly disposed to selecting a person and forming an attachment with them that if there's anyone there interacting with the baby, they will form that attachment, even if they're mistreated. Children who are mistreated, abused in any way, will still become attached to that parent. All infants become attached.
I would describe Ariel her as outgoing. She's very curious about people. She's gotten a happy response from the world when she's gone out to greet it. And so I guess I would say that she's outgoing.
Bowlby believes that as part of a history of being in a responsive, caring relationship, the child not only learns to believe that other people care about me and will be responsive to me, but at the same time develops a complementary view of him or herself. That is, if you care about me and are responsive to me, I not only learn that you will be responsive to me, but I learn I'm worthy of being responded to. I'm a person of value. I must be, because you're caring for me.
John Bowlby deserves enormous credit, very wise and creative, to recognize that mammalian infants form a special bond, relation, emotional in its mechanism to the caretakers. Terrific idea, and I believe true. Now we get to the controversy. If you're an empirical psychologist, say, very good. That's a nice idea. Now, probably, as Bowlby suggested, all infants will not have the same quality of attachment. He said some children are securely attached and some insecurely attached, and if an insecure attachment puts the infant at risk, then obviously the empirical psychologist wants to know which children are insecurely attached.
Dr. Mary Ainsworth, an early associate of John Bowlby, sought to develop a test for analyzing and measuring attachment. To do this, she developed a laboratory procedure called the strange situation. This procedure asks questions such as, what does the child do when alone with its mother in a non-familiar environment? What happens when a stranger enters the room? How does the child react when the mother then leaves the child with the stranger? And how does the child react when the mother returns?
Well, although the strange situation was originally designed to answer a normative question about development, it was quite clear that we had very important data about individual differences. And these sorted themselves out into three rather distinct patterns of behavior in the strained situation.
In one behavior pattern, Ainsworth noted that children typically use their mother as a secure base from which to explore. They are not unduly disturbed when a stranger comes in the room. Exploration continues as baby keeps a watchful eye on the stranger. When the mother leaves, these securely attached children may become distressed. However, they quickly settle down upon the mother's return. Ainsworth also noted two patterns of insecure attachment. Anxious, resistant children are wary of new situations and may cling to the mother even prior to separation. They are very distressed when mother departs, and when she returns, these infants typically continue to fret for some time. Anxious, avoidant children, on the other hand, are unfazed by the stranger. Usually they separate readily from the mother, and surprisingly, they actively avoid her when she returns. While the strange situation procedure has been useful in analyzing individual differences, not all are in agreement as to what the procedure measures.
Mary Ainsworth and her students made a good guess in inventing the strange situation. And I would say at the present time, it is the most popular procedure to measure security of attachment. The problem, as I see it, is this: that when that mother leaves the child alone in a laboratory room that is unfamiliar, that's a discrepant event, that's a novel event. Unfortunately, children differ temperamentally as a function of their biology in how fearful they become to that novel event. That's not a function of their attachment, it's a function of their temperament.
They're both girls and they both have the same parents, so naturally a lot of people tend to think, well, aren't they alike a lot? But they're really not. She's much more outward bound, people oriented. Has much better motor skills. She was more verbal at her age, and she's not as verbal. But they're both very different. They look at things different. They have different ways of understanding things and interacting with people and the things around them.
Jerome Kagan and his associates observed that some children actively explored the environment while others were more inhibited. This led to an investigation into the biological basis for this apparent difference in temperament.
See, we believe, but have not proven, that what these children inherit is an excitable limbic system. More specifically, the amygdala is a small structure in the limbic lobe. There's no question that the amygdala and its projections to the motor system and to the sympathetic nervous system is a very important participant in the emotions of fear and avoidance. Okay, since one of the important projections from the amygdala is to the sympathetic nervous system, we would expect to see the inhibited children show greater excitability, activity in the peripheral targets of the autonomic nervous system, like the pupil of the eye and the heart. And so we began to measure these things, and that was very gratifying because inhibited children, compared with other children, show larger rises in heart rate. They show greater dilation of the pupil of the eye, which is a sympathetic response. In addition to that, they will show larger rises in diastolic blood pressure when you go from sitting to standing. See, when we stand up, in order that we not faint, there has to be a sympathetic reflex to keep diastolic blood pressure up. Well, if a child therefore had a very reactive sympathetic nervous system, that child should show a greater increase in diastolic blood pressure when he or she stands up. than an uninhibited child, and that turned out. So no matter where we looked in the sympathetic nervous system, the inhibited children showed greater sympathetic reactivity. That gave us support that we were dealing with a physiological system.
Well, people often ask me about how much temperament has to do with the quality of attachment. And my answer is that relatively little. I'm quite certain that quality of attachment depends on real life events, and most particularly upon the nature of the interaction of the child with the attachment figure over a long time.
Most intriguing was Ainsworth's finding that a baby's behavior in the strange situation correlated directly with the mother's style of responding to her child in the home environment.
The cardinal characteristic of the mothers of securely attached babies was what I call sensitive responsiveness to infant signals, which means they receive the signal, they receive it in the sense of they're tuned into it, they interpret it appropriately, they respond pretty promptly and appropriately. The mothers of insecure infants were all insensitive, and we had a scale of sensitivity, and they were clearly all in the lower half of that rating.
I believe that many children who are classified as insecurely attached are not insecurely attached. They had sensitive mothers, and their mothers loved them. But these babies happened to be born with a temperament that predisposed them to become very, very fearful when their mother left them in an unfamiliar room, and therefore they did not calm easily.
Interestingly, temperament measures do predict how much the infant cries upon separation, but not how quickly the child calms upon reunion.
Part of the impetus for the stress on temperament in recent research has been a concern about blaming mothers or parents when things go wrong with the infant's development. And from the temperament perspective, at least some of development has to do with the child's inborn nature. Well, the idea of moving away from blaming mothers is to the good. But actually, an attachment perspective doesn't put blame on parents either. In fact, blame really isn't put on either member of the pair, because the quality of the attachment relationship, while influenced by the quality of care, is also influenced by the total context of the caregiving. There's clear evidence that the amount of social support available to the parents, the amount of stress in their lives, their own developmental histories, all are related to the quality of care and the quality of attachment. So I don't think there's anything in attachment theory that should lead us to blame parents when development doesn't go well.
Many times I find Pierre sort of like living in his own world. And when he's concentrating on playing certain toys or certain things, he will ignore everything else around him.
The quest to understand individual differences has shown that children are active participants in their own emotional development. In this regard, each child creates strategies for coping when there is no control and no support from others.
What we're interested in is the emotion that they show when they have to wait. They have no choice but to wait. What is it that they do in those situations?
Do you like cookies? Do you like those things? Animal breath. I have to go out of the room for 2 more minutes, but when I come downstairs, I'll give you some cookies, okay? Okay, I'm just going to set it right up there for now. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
All of our situations here, the parent is present in the room at the whole time, but during a portion of the visit, he or she is asked to not interact with the child. So the parent is sitting at a table filling out a questionnaire while the child is left on the floor.
And our purpose in that is to look at children's behavior when the parent isn't actively directing it.
Mommy has to work.
A lot of kids will do things like suck their thumb or pull their hair, something that a lot of us do even as adults, or pull their ear, or if by any chance something from home has been left in the room, they might go and find that thing from home. So you see a lot of what we call self-soothing behaviors, even though they don't look like they're distressed, suddenly become very focused on a toy or on some sort of activity. And these are all what we call emotional self-regulation strategies.
While such research has illuminated the path of infant emotional development, many questions remain as to how and why each child is different.
Temperament researchers and attachment researchers actually have different agendas. Attachment researchers are interested in understanding the child's basic attitudes and orientations concerning relationships, especially close relationships. Temperament researchers are trying to describe individual differences in terms of behavioral dimensions.
To the temperament researcher, each child forms a pattern for approaching different situations at different times. So, defining a given child's temperament is more than a question, it's a challenge.
There are so many different theories about temperament out there and a number of different ways to assess it. And depending upon how you assess it and what you think it is, obviously the connections you're going to find with other kinds of phenomena are going to differ. You're going to do better at assessing temperament if you have multiple reporters and multiple ways of assessing it. And so in our lab, we have parent report, but we also do an observation of infant temperament at infant age 6 months so that we can look at some of the emotional characteristics that are thought to be affected by temperament or related to temperament in the lab, as well as asking the parent to tell us about what goes on at home. How about showing mild fussing?
Oh, mild fussing, probably less than half the time.
Less than half the time. Again, during the last week when waiting for foods or liquids, how often did she cry loudly?
More than half the time.
Okay.
By placing the baby in a variety of situations, the researcher can evoke basic emotional reactions, such as joy, or, as in this episode, where baby is not allowed to touch the object, frustration and anger.
That's enough of that. We know what you're going to do for the next 10 seconds, don't we?
This information can later be analyzed and correlated with other observations.
Okay, now that one I would give active play for, since he's actually doing what that toy is designed to be doing, right? Yeah. So she is? Yeah. Okay, good.
In time, the researcher gains a better understanding of the child's temperament and how it affects the child's approach to novel situations and to interactions with others.
That was fun, huh? Let's do it again. Ready? I'm gonna get you.
As different as the attachment and temperament perspectives may appear, they're really not antagonistic. I think it's better to look at them as different perspectives on what's a very complicated developmental process.
There are some babies that, whether you call this temperament or not, that are particularly difficult to start with. Maybe it's due to the genes, maybe it's simply due to something that happened prenatally. And it may be that a mother who might be reasonably sensitive to a more normal child finds this too much to cope with. So I would be quite willing to say that some children are more difficult for mothers to handle than others.
The concept of attachment is a useful idea theoretically that we should not lose. I believe we have to find more valid measures of the notions of secure and insecure attachment.
You're getting at different parts of the whole thing. It is true that infants differ in terms of how much they cry, how active they are, and so forth. That's a part of the picture. It's also true that different infants have different relationships with their caregivers. And it's true that these relationships differ in terms of how effective they are in meeting the infant's needs for comforting, reassurance, and so forth. You might ask, how do differences in temperament of the infant influence the nature of the developing attachment? Does the particular temperament of the infant cause the attachment? Does the attachment cause the temperament? I think most researchers now believe that neither causes the other, but both are part of the developing child.
Oh, there you go. Does that feel better?
So, we see that each baby, with its unique temperament, seeks a sense of security through attachments with others. The special attachment of the child and caregiver, instinctively recognized over the ages, repeats its cycle in every generation. Yet the child comes to the world as an individual, acting on the caregiver and the environment in a dynamic way. And the twin influences of temperament and attachment help shape the infant's social and emotional development.